The dusty street of Genoa, Nevada felt like it was closing in around Natalie Jenkins as her brother Marcus gripped her elbow with bruising force, steering her through the crowded marketplace on that sweltering afternoon in August of 1875. She had no idea that in less than an hour her entire world would shatter into pieces so small she would question whether she had ever truly known the man who shared her blood. The sun beat down mercilessly on her bonnet as Marcus muttered something about needing to meet a business associate, his voice tight with an emotion she could not quite place but that made her stomach twist with unease. "Marcus, you are hurting me," Natalie said quietly, trying to pull her arm free without causing a scene. At 22 years old, she had learned to navigate her older brother's moods carefully since their parents had died 3 years prior in a cholera outbreak that devastated half the county. Marcus had been 25 then, suddenly responsible for their small ranch and a sister he seemed to view more as a burden than family. "Just keep walking," Marcus said through gritted teeth, not loosening his grip. His face was flushed, whether from the heat or something else. Natalie could not tell. They passed the general store, the blacksmith, the saloon with its tinny piano music drifting through the swinging doors. Genoa was a small town nestled in the Carson Valley, surrounded by the Sierra Nevada mountains that looked purple in the distance. It was a place where everyone knew everyone else's business, which made Marcus's strange behavior all the more puzzling. They rounded the corner behind the livery stable, and Natalie's breath caught in her throat. A crowd had gathered in what looked like some sort of auction. Men stood in clusters, some smoking cigars, others passing flasks between them. At the front, on a makeshift wooden platform, stood Silas Drummond, a man known throughout the territory for his questionable business dealings and complete lack of moral compass. "Marcus, what is this?" Natalie asked, genuine fear creeping into her voice now. She tried to dig her heels into the dirt, but her brother was stronger, and he practically dragged her forward. "It is the solution to our problems we're designed," Marcus hissed. "Do you have any idea how much debt Father left us in, how much I owe to the bank? They are going to take the ranch, Natalie, everything, unless I can pay them by the end of the month." "So you drag me to watch some horrible auction?" She was confused, not yet understanding, not yet comprehending that her brother could be capable of such betrayal. Marcus did not answer. Instead, he pulled her directly to where Silas Drummond stood. The older man's eyes lit up with greed when he saw them approaching, and he descended from the platform with surprising agility for someone with such a large belly. "Ah, Jenkins, right on time. And this must be the merchandise," Silas said, looking Natalie up and down in a way that made her skin crawl. "Merchandise?" Natalie repeated, looking between the two men. "Marcus, what is he talking about?" "Get her up there," Silas said, gesturing to two large men who stepped forward before Natalie could react. They grabbed her arms, and suddenly she was being lifted, carried, pushed up onto the platform while she struggled and cried out, "Marcus, Marcus, help me! What are you doing?" Her voice was shrill with panic, but her brother would not meet her eyes. He stood at the edge of the crowd, his face pale now, jaw clenched, but he made no move to stop what was happening. Silas climbed back onto the platform beside her, and the reality of the situation crashed over Natalie like a bucket of ice water. She was the merchandise. Her own brother had brought her here to be sold like cattle or furniture or a piece of property with no will of her own. "Gentlemen," Silas called out, his voice booming across the assembled crowd, "we have something special today. A fine young woman, healthy, good teeth, can cook and clean and sew. Starting bid is $200. "No!" Natalie screamed, trying to wrench herself free from the men holding her. "This is illegal! You cannot do this! Marcus, please!" But the crowd was already calling out bids, and Natalie felt like she was watching it happen to someone else. This could not be real. This could not be her life. America had fought a war to end slavery just 10 years ago. Her father had fought in that war, had come home with a limp and nightmares, but with his principles intact. And now his son was selling his daughter at an illegal auction in the middle of Nevada. "200, called a man with a scarred face. "250, shouted another. missing most of his teeth. Natalie felt bile rise in her throat as she looked at the men bidding on her. Most looked like exactly the type who would purchase a woman against her will, rough and cruel, with eyes that held no kindness. Then a voice cut through the chaos, deep and steady and somehow different from the others. $1,000. The crowd went silent. Every head turned to look at the man who had just bid an astronomical sum. Natalie's gaze followed, and through her tears she saw him. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a black Stetson pulled low over his eyes. His clothing was dusty from travel, but of good quality, his boots well made. He stood apart from the other bidders, his posture relaxed, but somehow commanding attention all the same. Silas's eyes went wide with greed. Did I hear that right? $1,000? You heard correctly, the man said, his voice carrying easily despite not being raised. On one condition. The transaction happens now. I take her and leave immediately, and this auction is done for the day. I want no trouble. Silas rubbed his hands together. Deal! Sold to the gentleman in the black hat for $1,000. Natalie felt like she could not breathe. The stranger moved through the crowd with purpose, and she could see him more clearly now. He was perhaps 27 or 28, with a strong jaw shadowed with several days' worth of stubble, and eyes that were a startling blue-gray. When those eyes met hers, there was something in them she had not expected, something almost like regret. He climbed onto the platform and pulled out a thick roll of bills, counting out the money into Silas's eager hands. Then he turned to Natalie, and his voice was gentle when he spoke, meant only for her ears. I'm going to take your arm now and lead you to my horse. Do not fight me. I will explain everything once we are away from here, but right now, we need to leave before this crowd decides they do not like how things went. Who are you? Natalie whispered, still shaking. Someone who is going to tell you the truth your brother should have told you years ago, he said. My name is Xavier Remington. Can you walk? She nodded numbly, and he took her arm, his grip firm but not painful. Nothing like Marcus's had been. Xavier led her down from the platform, and the crowd parted before them. Natalie caught sight of her brother standing at the back, and their eyes met for just a moment. She saw shame there, and guilt, but also relief. He had gotten what he wanted. He had sold his own sister to pay his debts. Marcus Jenkins, Xavier called out, his voice carrying across the space. Marcus flinched. If I ever see you within 100 miles of your sister again, I will kill you. Do you understand me? Marcus gave a jerky nod, and then Xavier was guiding Natalie away, his hand steady at her elbow as they walked through the streets of Genoa toward a beautiful chestnut mare tied outside the general store. Beside the mare stood a large black stallion that stamped its feet impatiently. That is Duchess, Xavier said, nodding to the mare. She has a gentle temperament. Do you ride? Yes, Natalie managed to say, her voice coming out rough. She felt like she was moving through a dream, nothing feeling quite real. Good. We have a long ride ahead of us. Xavier untied both horses and handed her Duchess's reins. Then he swung himself up onto the stallion with practiced ease and looked down at her, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat. I know you are scared and confused. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I promise you, Natalie, I am not going to hurt you. Once we are safely away from town, I will tell you everything. Natalie looked around the street, at the town she had called home her entire life. A few people had stopped to stare at them, no doubt having heard about the auction. She recognized Mrs. Henderson from the church and felt shame burn through her. Everyone would know now. Everyone would know what Marcus had done. With trembling hands, she gathered her skirts and mounted Duchess. The horse shifted beneath her, but responded well when Natalie gathered the reins. Xavier nodded with approval and turned his stallion toward the road leading out of town. They rode in silence for what felt like hours, Natalie was aware of Xavier glancing at her periodically, as if checking to make sure she had not fallen off or tried to run, but he did not speak. The sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Under different circumstances, Natalie might have found it beautiful. Finally, when Genoa was far behind them, and they were surrounded by nothing but sagebrush and the occasional juniper tree, Xavier slowed his stallion to a walk. Natalie did the same with Duchess, and the two horses fell into step beside each other. "There is a creek about a mile ahead," Xavier said. "We will stop there for the night, but I want to talk to you first before we get there, while I still have good light to see your face." "Why does that matter?" Natalie asked, her first words since they had left town. "Because I need to see your reaction when I tell you what I'm about to tell you. I need to know if you already knew, if you were part of it, or if you are truly as innocent as I think you are." Natalie's hands tightened on the reins. "Part of what? I do not understand any of this. Why did you pay so much for me? What do you want?" Xavier took off his hat and ran a hand through his dark hair before replacing it. "5 years ago, my father, William Remington, loaned your father a substantial sum of money to keep your ranch from going under during a bad drought. Do you remember that time?" Natalie thought back. She had been 17 then, and yes, she remembered her father being worried about money, remembered him taking a trip to Carson City and coming back with renewed hope. "I remember things getting better for a while," she said slowly. "Your father signed a contract," Xavier continued. "The loan was for $5,000 to be repaid within 5 years with interest. If he could not repay it, the contract stated that the debt would transfer to his heir, and if that heir also could not pay, then certain collateral would be forfeit." "The ranch," Natalie said. "Marcus has been worried sick about losing the ranch. He told me we have debts, but I did not know the details. He kept all of that from me." "Not the ranch," Xavier said quietly, and his eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You, Natalie, the collateral was you." The words hung in the air between them, and Natalie felt the world tilt on its axis. "What?" "Your father signed a contract that if the debt could not be repaid, his daughter would be given in marriage to William Remington's son. To me." Natalie's mind reeled. "That cannot be legal. That cannot be real." "It is not legal, not really," Xavier admitted. "But my father was a powerful man, and he had ways of enforcing contracts that had nothing to do with the law. When your father died 3 years ago, the debt transferred to Marcus. I have been traveling, working my father's other ranches in Colorado and Wyoming, and I only recently learned that the deadline was approaching. When I arrived in Genoa 2 days ago and made inquiries, I discovered what Marcus was planning." "The auction?" Natalie whispered. "He was going to sell you to pay the debt and keep the ranch, but here is what he did not know, what he could not have known because I only learned it myself a month ago. My father died in June. Heart gave out in his sleep, and before he died, he burned that contract. He told me on his deathbed that he regretted ever making such an arrangement, that it was old world thinking and had no place in America. He asked me to forgive him." Natalie tried to process this flood of information. "So there is no debt? No contract?" "Oh, there is still a debt in the legal sense. Marcus owes my father's estate $5,000 plus interest, but there is no contract involving you. You were never collateral. Not anymore. Maybe you never really were, not in any way that would stand up in a court of law." "Then why did you buy me at that auction?" Natalie demanded, feeling anger beginning to replace her shock. "If I was free, if there was no contract, why did you pay $1,000 for me like I was a horse or a piece of furniture?" Xavier's expression was pained. "Because I could not let one of those other men buy you. Did you see them, Natalie? Did you see what would have happened to you?" She had seen them. She had looked into their faces and seen her future if any of them had won the bidding, and it had been a future of horror and pain. "I bought you so I could set you free," Xavier said. "I bought you so I could tell you the truth about what your brother did, about what my father did, and give you choices. Real choices about what you want to do with your life." Natalie felt tears burning in her eyes again, but she blinked them back furiously. She had cried enough for one day. What choices? I have nothing. No money, no family, nowhere to go. Marcus sold me, and even if I went back to Genoa, everyone knows now. I would be ruined. You have more choices than you think, Xavier said. My father's ranch, the main one, is about 30 miles west of here, closer to Carson City. It is a big spread, successful, with cattle and horses and good water. When my father died, he left it all to me, his only child. I have a housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, who is Chinese, whose husband works as my foreman. She is a good woman, kind, and she could use help around the house. I could employ you there, pay you fair wages, give you time to figure out what you want to do next. Or, if you want, I could give you money and put you on a stage to California or back east, wherever you want to start over. You would do that? Natalie asked, searching his face for deception. You would just give me money and let me go? Yes, Xavier said simply. You do not owe me anything, Natalie. Not your work, not your company, and certainly not your hand in marriage just because my father wrote that cursed contract. You are a free woman, and I aim to make sure you stay that way. They had reached the creek, a small stream that bubbled over smooth rocks with cottonwood trees providing shade along its banks. Xavier dismounted and offered his hand to help Natalie down. She hesitated for just a moment before taking it, and his palm was warm and calloused against hers. I need to be honest about one more thing, Xavier said as he led the horses to the water. When I first learned about the contract my father made before he died and burned it, I was angry. I felt like my life was being decided for me, like I was being forced into a marriage I had no say in. But I was also curious about you. I asked around Genoa very discreetly, and everyone who spoke of you did so kindly. They said you were patient with the children at church, that you helped nurse people during a flu outbreak last winter, that you had a quick mind and a kind heart. Natalie felt her cheeks flush. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to know that if you decide to come to the ranch, if you decide to stay even just for a little while, it would not be a hardship for me. I would welcome your company. And if, over time, you found that you could see me as more than just the man who bought you at an auction, if you found you could see me as a friend or maybe even something more, well, I would not object to that either. Natalie's heart was pounding. She looked at Xavier, really looked at him, and saw a man who could have taken advantage of the terrible situation she was in but had chosen not to. A man who was offering her freedom when he could have demanded obedience. A man whose eyes held genuine warmth when they looked at her, not the greed or lust she had seen in the faces of the other bidders. I do not know what I want, she said honestly. Today has been the worst day of my life. I feel like I do not know anything anymore, not about my family or my place in the world or who I can trust. That is fair, Xavier said. You do not have to make any decisions tonight. Let us just make camp, eat something, rest, and tomorrow we will ride to the ranch. You can meet Mrs. Chen, see the place, and decide from there. Does that sound acceptable? It was more than acceptable. It was a kindness Natalie had not expected to receive on this day. She nodded, and Xavier gave her a small smile, the first real smile she had seen from him. It transformed his face, making him look younger and more approachable. They worked together to set up a simple camp. Xavier had bedrolls tied to his saddle, and he gave one to Natalie while he took the other for himself, placing it a respectful distance away. He built a small fire and produced jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags, along with a canteen of water. Not much of a supper, he said apologetically, but tomorrow night Mrs. Chen will feed us properly. She makes the best roast chicken you have ever tasted. Natalie accepted the food gratefully, realizing she had not eaten since breakfast. They ate in comfortable silence, the sound of the creek and the crackling fire filling the space between them. As the sky darkened and stars began to appear, Natalie felt some of the tension leave her body. She was not safe, not really, not until she understood what her life was going to become. But she was safer than she had been that afternoon on that auction block. "Can I ask you a question?" she said after a while. "Of course." "Your father's contract. If it had still been valid, if he hadn't burned it, would you have enforced it? Would you have forced me to marry you?" Xavier was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. I have asked myself that question 100 times since I learned about it, and honestly, Natalie, I do not know. I like to think I would have done the right thing, that I would have found a way to honor my father's memory without dishonoring you, but I also know that a month ago, I was a different man than I am today. A month ago, I had not watched my father die. I had not seen him weak and regretful, asking for forgiveness for things he did when he thought he was strong and invincible. You loved him, Natalie observed. I did. He was hard and often ruthless in business, but he was a good father to me. He taught me to ride, to rope, to run a ranch. After my mother died when I was 10, he never remarried. He said she was his only love and no one could replace her. I think that was part of why he made that contract with your father. He wanted me to have what he had, a good woman to build a life with. And he thought he could arrange that the way he arranged cattle sales and land deals. You cannot arrange love like a business transaction, Natalie said softly. No, Xavier agreed. You cannot. That is what he finally understood at the end. They fell silent again, and Natalie found herself watching Xavier across the fire. He had removed his hat, and she could see his face clearly now. He was handsome in a rugged way with strong features and those arresting blue-gray eyes, but it was more than his looks that drew her attention. It was the way he moved with quiet confidence, the way he spoke with measured thoughtfulness, the way he had not touched her beyond what was necessary and respectful. Tell me about the ranch, she said, wanting to know more about where she would be going. Xavier's face brightened. It is called the Silver Creek Ranch, after the creek that runs through the property. We have about 2,000 acres of good grazing land, with views of the mountains to the west. The house is stone and timber built to last. My grandfather built it 40 years ago when he first came to Nevada. Back when it was still just a territory, we run about 500 head of cattle and breed horses on the side. The horses are actually my passion. I love working with them, training them. There's something about the connection between a man and a horse, the trust that has to be built, that I find satisfying in a way that cattle never quite provide. It sounds beautiful, Natalie said, and she meant it. Growing up on her family's small ranch, she had always loved the land, the animals, the sense of working with nature rather than against it. It is, Xavier said, and it could use a woman's touch around the house. Mrs. Chen does her best, but she is one person trying to care for a large house, while also managing the cooking for the hands who live in the bunkhouse. If you decided to stay, even temporarily, your help would be genuinely appreciated. And Natalie, I want to be clear about this. If you stay, you would be an employee, paid fair wages. You would have your own room with a lock on the door. You would be free to leave whenever you choose. I will not trap you there. Why are you being so kind to me? Natalie asked, the question bursting from her before she could stop it. You do not know me. You owe me nothing. Xavier met her gaze across the fire. Maybe I'm trying to make up for what my father did, or maybe I am trying to be the kind of man I want to be regardless of what anyone else has done. Or maybe, and here his voice softened, maybe I looked at you standing on that auction block, terrified and betrayed, and I saw someone worth saving. Natalie felt something shift in her chest, some wall she had built up beginning to crack. I am not sure I am worth $1,000. You are worth that and more, Xavier said firmly, and I will spend however long it takes to make you believe that. They sat in silence for a while longer, and then Xavier banked the fire and suggested they get some sleep. Natalie lay in her bedroll, staring up at the stars, and listened to Xavier's breathing even out as he fell asleep. She thought about everything that had happened, everything that had changed in the course of a single day. This morning she had been Natalie Jenkins, sister to Marcus, living in the only home she had ever known. Tonight she was still Natalie Jenkins, but everything else had changed. She was alone in the wilderness with a stranger who had bought her at an auction but claimed he wanted to set her free. She should have been terrified. She should have been planning to run at first light, but instead she found herself feeling something unexpected. She found herself feeling hope. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Xavier was already awake when Natalie stirred, and he had coffee brewing over a rekindled fire. The smell alone was enough to draw her from her bedroll, and she accepted the tin cup he offered with gratitude. "Sleep well?" he asked. "Better than I expected," Natalie admitted. They broke camp efficiently, and soon they were back on the horses, riding west toward the Silver Creek Ranch. As they traveled, Xavier pointed out landmarks and told her about the area. He was easy to talk to, Natalie discovered, with a dry sense of humor that surprised her into laughing more than once. "Do you see that rock formation there?" Xavier said, pointing to a cluster of red stones jutting from the earth. "When I was 15, I got it into my head that I could climb that. Made it about halfway up before I got stuck. My father had to ride out with 3 ranch hands and a rope to get me down. I did not live it down for months." "I cannot imagine you getting stuck anywhere," Natalie said, then blushed at how that might sound. But Xavier just laughed. "I was much more foolish at 15, and much smaller. My father used to joke that I grew a foot in one summer and did not know what to do with all the extra height." As the sun climbed higher, they crested a ridge, and Xavier reined in his horse. "There," he said, and Natalie could hear the pride in his voice. Silver Creek Ranch. Natalie looked down into the valley below and caught her breath. The ranch spread out before them, and it was beautiful. The house Xavier had described sat near a creek that glinted silver in the sunlight, surrounded by green pastures dotted with cattle and horses. Outbuildings included a large barn, a bunkhouse, corrals, and what looked like a smithy. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still holding snow even in August. "It is magnificent," Natalie breathed. "Come on," Xavier said with a grin. "Let me introduce you to everyone." They rode down into the valley, and as they approached the main house, Natalie saw a small woman emerge from the front door, shading her eyes against the sun. When she recognized Xavier, her face broke into a wide smile. "Mr. Xavier," she called, hurrying forward. "You are back! We did not expect you for another few days." "Plans changed, Mrs. Chen," Xavier said, dismounting and then moving to help Natalie down. "I want you to meet someone. This is Natalie Jenkins. Natalie, this is Mrs. Chen, the finest housekeeper and cook in all of Nevada." Mrs. Chen was a small Chinese woman, probably in her mid-40s, with her black hair pulled back in a neat bun. She had kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled, but those eyes were also sharp, taking in everything about Natalie in one sweeping glance. "Miss Jenkins," Mrs. Chen said with a respectful nod. "Welcome to Silver Creek Ranch. You look tired. Come inside and I will make tea." "Thank you," Natalie said, grateful beyond words for the warmth in the woman's voice. Inside, the house was cool and beautifully furnished. The main room had a large stone fireplace, comfortable chairs, and rugs covering the wooden floors. Everything was clean and well-maintained, speaking to Mrs. Chen's skill as a housekeeper. Over tea and fresh biscuits, Xavier explained the situation to Mrs. Chen, leaving nothing out. Natalie was grateful that he told the truth, that he did not try to make up some story or hide what had happened. Mrs. Chen listened with growing outrage on her face. "Her own brother," Mrs. Chen said, shaking her head. "That is shameful. You did right to bring her here, Mr. Xavier." "I was hoping Natalie might stay on for a while," Xavier said. "Help you around the house, if she is willing. I have been thinking we need more help anyway, with the ranch growing the way it has." "That would be wonderful," Mrs. Chen said, and then she looked directly at Natalie. "But only if you want to stay, Miss Jenkins. A woman should have choices about her own life." "I would like to stay," Natalie said, surprising herself with how quickly the answer came. "At least for a while to figure things out, and please call me Natalie." "Then you call me May," Mrs. Chen said with a warm smile. "Mrs. Chen is too formal for friends. Come, I will show you to a room. You can wash up and rest, and then we will talk about what needs doing around here." Natalie followed May up a staircase to the second floor. The room she was given was spacious and bright, with a large window overlooking the pastures. There was a real bed with a quilted coverlet, a wardrobe, a dresser with a mirror, and a washstand with a pitcher and basin. It is beautiful, Natalie said, running her hand over the quilt. It was Mr. Xavier's mother's sewing room, May said, but we have not used it for that in years. The lock on the door works, she added significantly. Mr. Xavier told me to make sure you knew that. He told you everything then? He did. And I want you to know, Natalie, you are safe here. Mr. Xavier is a good man. His father could be hard, but the son is different. Kinder. You have nothing to fear from him. I am beginning to see that, Natalie said softly. May smiled and patted her arm. Rest now. Tonight we will have a proper meal, and tomorrow we can talk about your duties, if you decide you want to take them on. After May left, Natalie poured water into the basin and washed her face and hands, scrubbing away the dust and sweat of travel. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. 24 hours ago, she had been someone different. Now she was here, in this beautiful room, in this beautiful house, offered safety and employment by a man who had every reason to take advantage of her, but had chosen not to. That evening, May made good on her promise of a proper meal. She served roast chicken with potatoes and carrots, fresh bread with butter, and apple pie for dessert. Xavier joined them at the long dining table, and they were also joined by May's husband, Thomas Chen, the ranch foreman. Thomas was a quiet man with a steady presence, and Natalie liked him immediately. Over dinner, they told her about the ranch, about the hands who worked there, about the rhythms of life in this beautiful valley. It was clear that Xavier ran his operation with fairness and respect, that he treated his workers well and earned their loyalty in return. The men will be respectful to you, Xavier said at one point. But if any of them give you trouble, any trouble at all, you tell me immediately. Understood? Understood, Natalie agreed. The days that followed took on a rhythm that Natalie found comforting. She helped May with the housework, learning the routines of the ranch. She discovered she had a talent for baking, and soon she was making bread and pies that the ranch hands raved about. She mended clothes, tended the vegetable garden, and helped May with the massive task of feeding everyone. But it was the time she spent with Xavier that became the highlight of her days. He was often busy with ranch work, but in the evenings, he would seek her out, and they would talk. Sometimes they sat on the porch and watched the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Sometimes they walked down to the creek and listened to the water. And sometimes Xavier took her to the horse barn and introduced her to his beloved horses. "This is Comet," he said one evening about 2 weeks after her arrival, leading out a beautiful gray mare with a white star on her forehead. "She is the smartest horse I have ever trained. Watch this." He led Comet through a series of commands, and the horse responded with grace and intelligence that was remarkable to watch. Xavier's face was alight with joy as he worked with the animal, and Natalie found herself watching him as much as the horse. "Would you like to try?" Xavier asked, noticing her attention. "I do not know how," Natalie admitted. "I can teach you," Xavier said, "if you want to learn." And so began another ritual. Several evenings a week, after the work was done, Xavier taught Natalie how to work with the horses. He was a patient teacher, never rushing her, always praising her successes and gently correcting her mistakes. Through those lessons, Natalie learned about Xavier's philosophy on training. "It is all about trust," he explained one evening, as Natalie successfully got a young gelding to follow her lead. "The horse has to trust that you will not hurt it, that you will be consistent and fair. Once you have that trust, the horse will do anything for you, but if you break that trust, it is almost impossible to get it back." "Is that true for people too?" Natalie asked. Xavier met her eyes. "Yes, that is true for people too." As summer turned to early autumn, Natalie found herself thinking less about what had been taken from her and more about what she was building here at Silver Creek Ranch. She had friends in May and Thomas. She had meaningful work that challenged her and made her feel useful. And she had Xavier, who was becoming something she could not quite define, but that felt increasingly important to her heart. One afternoon in late September, Natalie was in the kitchen with May, making preserves from the late summer fruit when they heard horses approaching. Xavier had gone into Carson City that morning on business, and Natalie assumed he was returning. But when she looked out the window, her blood ran cold. "It is Marcus," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. May immediately went to the door and called for Thomas. Within moments, Thomas had appeared with 2 ranch hands, both armed. Xavier had left instructions that if Marcus Jenkins ever showed up, he was not to be allowed near Natalie. Natalie watched from the window as her brother dismounted. He looked terrible, gaunt and unshaven, his clothes dirty. When Thomas stepped forward to block his path, Marcus held up his hands. "I just want to talk to my sister," Marcus said, and Natalie could hear the desperation in his voice even from inside the house. "Please, I have to explain." "There is nothing to explain," Thomas said firmly. "Mr. Remington was clear. You are not welcome here." "Natalie," Marcus called, looking toward the house. "Natalie, please, just let me talk to you." Against her better judgment, Natalie found herself walking to the door. May tried to stop her, but Natalie shook her head. "I need to do this," she said. "I need to hear what he has to say." She stepped out onto the porch, and Marcus's face crumpled with relief and shame when he saw her. "You look well," he said. "I am glad. I have been so worried." "Worried?" Natalie repeated, and her voice was cold. "You sold me, Marcus. You brought me to that auction without telling me what you were planning, and you sold me to the highest bidder. What exactly were you worried about?" "I had no choice," Marcus said, and there were tears in his eyes. "The debt was going to take everything. I would have been ruined. I thought maybe whoever bought you would treat you well. Maybe even marry you and you would have a better life than I could give you." "You thought," Natalie said, her voice shaking with anger. "You did not ask me. You did not tell me. You just decided that my life was worth less than your ranch." "I am sorry," Marcus said, and he sank to his knees in the dirt. "Natalie, I am so sorry. I know I cannot take it back. But I want you to know I have regretted it every moment since. I lost the ranch anyway. The bank took it last week. Everything Father worked for is gone, and I deserve it. I deserve all of it." Natalie looked at her brother, the man who had raised her after their parents died, and felt a complicated tangle of emotions. Anger, yes, but also pity. He had made terrible choices, and he was paying for them now. "I forgive you," she said quietly, and Marcus looked up with hope in his eyes. "But I cannot forget, Marcus, and I do not want you in my life. You made your choice, and I am making mine. I have a good life here, better than anything I had in Genoa. Do not come back. Do not try to contact me. Just leave and make a new life for yourself somewhere else." "Natalie, please," Marcus said. "Leave," she repeated, and this time her voice was firm. "Thomas, please escort him off the property." Marcus stood on shaking legs, and Thomas and the ranch hands moved to flank him. As Marcus mounted his horse, he looked at Natalie one more time. "I hope you can be happy," he said. "I hope he treats you well." "He does," Natalie said, "because he is a good man, something you never learned to be." She turned and walked back into the house, and she did not watch as her brother rode away. She felt May's arm around her shoulders, offering comfort, and she let herself lean into it. Xavier returned an hour later, and Thomas immediately told him what had happened. Xavier found Natalie in the library, sitting by the window, staring out at nothing. "Are you all right?" he asked, sitting down beside her. "I do not know," Natalie said honestly. "I said goodbye to my brother today, the only family I have left in the world, and I should feel sad, but mostly I just feel empty." "Blood does not make a family," Xavier said gently. "Love does. Loyalty does. The people who stand by you and support you, those are your family. And Natalie, if you will let me, I would like to be your family." She turned to look at him, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. It was tender and hopeful and full of feeling. "Xavier," she said softly. "I know I said I would not pressure you," Xavier continued. "I know I said you would have all the time you need, But Natalie, these past 2 months have been the best of my life. Having you here, talking with you, teaching you about the horses, eating meals with you at the table, it has made this house feel like a home in a way it never did before. I find myself looking for you during the day, finding excuses to be where you are. And I know this started in the worst possible way, but I have to tell you that I'm falling in love with you. Natalie's heart was racing. She thought about the past 2 months, about how Xavier had kept every promise he made to her, about how he treated her with respect and kindness, about how her day felt brighter when he smiled at her, how her heart beat faster when their hands accidentally touched, how she had started dreaming about him at night. "I am falling in love with you too," she said, and watched his face light up with joy. "Truly?" Xavier asked, moving closer to her. "Truly," Natalie confirmed. "You are kind and patient and good. You saved me when you did not have to. You gave me freedom when you could have demanded obedience. You have made me feel valued and safe. How could I not love you?" Xavier reached for her hand, and this time when they touched, it was different. This time it was the touch of two people acknowledging their feelings, choosing each other freely. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "Natalie Jenkins, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Not because of any contract or obligation, but because we choose each other, because we want to build a life together, because we have found something real and true in the midst of something that started so wrong. "Yes," Natalie said, feeling tears of happiness slip down her cheeks. "Yes, Xavier, I will marry you." He pulled her into his arms, and she went willingly, feeling the solid strength of him, breathing in his scent of leather and sage. And when he tilted her face up and kissed her for the first time, it was gentle and sweet, and held the promise of all the tomorrows to come. They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in Carson City. May and Thomas stood up with them, and several of the ranch hands attended, along with a few friends Xavier had in town. It was a simple ceremony, but it was perfect. Natalie wore a dress that May had helped her sew, a beautiful cream-colored gown with lace at the collar and cuffs. Xavier wore a new suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his eyes shining with happiness as he said his vows. "I promise to honor you, cherish you, and stand by you all the days of my life," Xavier said, holding both her hands in his. "I promise to give you the freedom to be who you are meant to be, and the support to become who you want to become. I promise to build a life with you based on trust and love and respect. This I swear before God and these witnesses." "I promise to love you with my whole heart," Natalie said, her voice steady and sure. "I promise to be your partner in all things, to stand by you in good times and in bad. I promise to trust you as you have earned my trust, and to build a home with you that is filled with love and laughter. This I swear before God and these witnesses." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed her with such tenderness that Natalie felt her heart might burst from happiness. This was real. This was her life now. She was Mrs. Xavier Remington, mistress of Silver Creek Ranch, wife to a good man who loved her. The wedding night was spent in a hotel in Carson City, and Xavier was as gentle and patient as he had been in everything else. He made sure Natalie felt safe and cherished, asking her permission for every touch, every kiss. And when they finally came together as husband and wife, it was beautiful and right in a way that made Natalie grateful that she had waited for this for him. "I love you," Xavier whispered against her skin as they lay tangled together afterward. "I will spend every day of my life making sure you know how precious you are to me." "I love you too," Natalie said, tracing patterns on his chest. "I never thought I could be this happy. After what Marcus did, I thought my life was over, but you saved me, Xavier. You gave me a new life." "We saved each other," Xavier said. "I was going through the motions before you came, running the ranch because it was what I was supposed to do, but not really living. You brought light and joy and purpose to my days. You made me want to be the best man I can be." They returned to the ranch the next day, and life took on a new rhythm. Natalie threw herself into her role as Xavier's wife, working alongside May to manage the household and support the running of the ranch. She discovered she had a talent for bookkeeping and began helping Xavier manage the financial side of the operation. "You have a better head for numbers than I do," Xavier said one evening as they worked together in his study. "Look how you organize this ledger. Everything makes sense now." "I like things to be orderly," Natalie said with a smile, "and I like being useful." "You are more than useful," Xavier said, pulling her into his lap. "You are essential. I do not know how I ever ran this place without you." The first year of their marriage was full of joy and discovery. They learned each other's rhythms and preferences, their strengths and weaknesses. They had disagreements occasionally, but they always talked through them with respect and honesty. Xavier never raised his voice to her, never tried to control her, always treated her as an equal partner. Natalie bloomed under this love and respect. She gained confidence in herself and her abilities. She started making suggestions about the ranch operations, and Xavier listened to her ideas, often implementing them. Together they made the Silver Creek Ranch even more successful than it had been under Xavier's father's management. In the spring of 1877, Natalie discovered she was pregnant. She told Xavier one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, and he literally whooped with joy, picking her up and spinning her around before remembering himself and setting her down gently. "Are you sure?" he asked, his hands cradling her face. "I am sure," Natalie said, laughing at his excitement. "Dr. Morrison confirmed it this afternoon when I went into Carson City with May." "We are going to have a baby," Xavier said wonderingly. "Our baby." "Natalie, you have made me the happiest man alive." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Xavier was attentive to the point of being overprotective. He tried to stop Natalie from doing any heavy work, hovering until she finally had to sit him down and explain that she was pregnant, not fragile. "I need to keep busy," she told him, "and I am healthy and strong. Dr. Morrison said everything is perfect. You have to trust me to know what I can handle." "I do trust you," Xavier said. "I just love you so much, and I want you and the baby to be safe." "We will be safe," Natalie assured him, "but you cannot wrap me in cotton wool for 9 months." Their son was born in November of 1877 during the first snowfall of the season. The labor was long and difficult, and Xavier paced outside the bedroom door going half mad with worry. When May finally emerged and told him he had a son, that both mother and baby were healthy, he practically knocked her over in his rush to get inside. Natalie was exhausted but glowing with happiness as she held their baby. When Xavier sat beside her on the bed and looked down at his son for the first time, she saw tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," Xavier whispered. "You are amazing. Natalie, I do not have words for what you have given me." "We made him together," Natalie said softly. "Our son, our family." They named him William after Xavier's father, but they called him Liam. He had Xavier's dark hair and Natalie's hazel eyes, and he was the light of their lives. Xavier was a devoted father, and Natalie often came upon him in the nursery, just standing over the cradle, watching Liam sleep with an expression of pure wonder. Life settled into a beautiful pattern. The ranch thrived under their joint management. Liam grew from an infant into a toddler who ran everywhere and got into everything. Natalie and Xavier's love deepened with each passing year, growing from the passionate intensity of new love into something richer and more complex. When Liam was 3, they had a daughter they named Rosemary, with Xavier's blue-gray eyes and Natalie's softer features. 2 years after that came another son, Samuel, who looked exactly like Xavier but had Natalie's sweet temperament. The house that had once felt too large and empty was now filled with the sounds of children playing, of laughter and occasional tears, of life being lived fully and joyfully. May and Thomas doted on the children, and the ranch hands became like uncles, teaching the boys to ride and the little girl that she could do anything her brothers could do. One evening in the spring of 1885, when Liam was 7, Rosemary was 4, and Samuel was 2, Natalie and Xavier sat on the porch after putting the children to bed. Natalie leaned against her husband's shoulder, perfectly content. "Do you ever think about that day?" Xavier asked quietly. "The auction?" "Sometimes," Natalie admitted. "But when I do, I think about how it led me here. To you, to our children, to this life, and I cannot regret something that brought me so much happiness." "Your brother sold you thinking he was taking your freedom," Xavier said, "but instead he gave you the freedom to find where you truly belonged." "I belonged with you," Natalie said, turning to kiss him. "I always belonged with you." "And I with you," Xavier agreed, "every day for the rest of our lives." As the years continued to pass, the Silver Creek Ranch became known throughout Nevada as one of the finest and most well-run operations in the territory. Xavier and Natalie's partnership was admired by all who knew them, a true meeting of equals who brought out the best in each other. Their children grew strong and healthy, learning the values their parents taught through example: hard work, integrity, kindness, and the importance of treating all people with dignity and respect. Liam showed an aptitude for working with the cattle. Rosemary inherited her father's gift with horses. And Samuel loved the business side, often sitting with his mother as she worked on the ledgers. In 1889, Nevada officially became a state, and the Remingtons celebrated with a party at the ranch that brought together friends and neighbors from across the valley. As Natalie stood with Xavier, watching their children dance with the other young people, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had started as a woman with no choices, sold by her brother like property. But Xavier had given her choices, had given her freedom, and she had chosen him. Every day since, she continued to choose him. And he chose her. That was what marriage was supposed to be, she had learned. Not a cage, but a partnership. Not a loss of freedom, but an expansion of it. Two people choosing to face life together. "What are you thinking about?" Xavier asked, slipping his arm around her waist. "About how lucky I am," Natalie said. "About how much I love our life." "Our life," Xavier repeated and smiled. "I like the sound of that. Not my life or your life, but ours. Together." "Always together," Natalie agreed. When May and Thomas retired in 1892, moving to a small house on the edge of the property where they could enjoy their later years in peace, Natalie and Xavier hired additional help to run the household. By this time, Liam was 15 and taking on more responsibilities around the ranch. Rosemary at 12 was already training horses with a skill that rivaled her father's, and Samuel at 10 showed he would be a shrewd businessman someday. The children knew their parents' story, how their mother had come to the ranch, how their father had bought her freedom. Natalie and Xavier had decided early on to be honest with them, to teach them about the difference between right and wrong, about standing up for what is just even when it is difficult. "Your mother is the bravest person I know," Xavier told his children one evening when Liam had asked about it. "She survived betrayal and still opened her heart to love. That takes true courage." "And your father is the most honorable man I have ever known," Natalie added. "He could have taken advantage of a terrible situation, but instead he chose to do what was right, even though it would have been easier to do otherwise. That is integrity." In the summer of 1895, 20 years after that terrible day at the auction in Genoa, Natalie and Xavier took a trip back to the town. It was the first time Natalie had returned, and she went with some trepidation. But she wanted to see if Mrs. Henderson was still alive. The church woman who had been kind to her in her youth, Genoa had not changed much. It was still a small town, though it had grown somewhat with Nevada's statehood. They found Mrs. Henderson still living in the same house, now elderly, but still sharp as a tack. "Natalie," the old woman exclaimed when she opened the door, "I heard you had married well, but I did not know if the stories were true. Come in, come in." Over tea, Natalie told her story, and Mrs. Henderson listened with tears in her eyes. "I heard what Marcus did," the old woman said. "I prayed for you every day, hoping you had found safety. I am so glad my prayers were answered." "Do you know what happened to Marcus?" Natalie asked, realizing she had never followed up on her brother's fate. He left town not long after that terrible day, Mrs. Henderson said. I heard he went to California, got work on a ranch out there. Someone said he wrote a letter a few years back saying he had found religion and was trying to make amends for his past. But I do not know if that is true. I hope it is, Natalie said. I hope he found peace. You are more generous than I would be, Mrs. Henderson said, but then you always had a kind heart. Before they left Genoa, Xavier and Natalie visited the cemetery where her parents were buried. Natalie stood before their graves and told them about her life, about their grandchildren, about how she had found happiness despite everything. I forgave Marcus, she said quietly. Not for him, but for me. I did not want to carry anger in my heart anymore. I hope you understand. Xavier stood beside her, his hand in hers, and when she was ready, they left the past behind and returned to their future. The years continued to unfold with their share of challenges and triumphs. There were droughts that tested their resources, cattle rustlers that required Xavier and the hands to spend nights on patrol, illnesses that scared them with their severity but ultimately passed. But through it all, Natalie and Xavier faced everything together, their love the foundation upon which everything else was built. Liam grew into a fine young man who, at 21 in 1898, took a wife of his own, a smart young woman named Catherine, who he had met at church. The wedding was held at the ranch, and as Natalie watched her firstborn say his vows, she thought about her own wedding day and how much joy it had brought her. Rosemary showed no interest in marriage, declaring at 16 that she would rather work with horses than deal with suitors. Xavier supported her completely, telling her she could choose her own path in life. Eventually, at 19, she met a man who shared her passion for horses, and they married in a quiet ceremony before moving to Colorado to start their own breeding operation. Samuel, as expected, took to the business side of the ranch, and by the time he was 18, he was managing much of the financial operations while also courting the daughter of a banker in Carson City. Our children are making their own ways in the world, Natalie said to Xavier one evening as they sat in their favorite spot on the porch. They were in their 40s now, with gray threading through their hair, but the love between them had not diminished. If anything, it had grown stronger. We raised them well, Xavier said. Taught them to think for themselves, to stand up for what is right, to love fully and honestly. We did, Natalie agreed, and they are teaching their own children the same lessons. By 1905, 30 years after that fateful day, Natalie and Xavier were grandparents several times over. The ranch had expanded, and the Remington name was respected throughout Nevada and beyond. They had weathered storms both literal and figurative, had celebrated triumphs and mourned losses, had lived a full and rich life together. One evening, as they celebrated their 28th wedding anniversary, Xavier raised his glass to his wife. To the woman who changed my life, he said, who taught me what real love looks like, who gave me a family and a home and a reason to be the best man I can be. Natalie, you are my everything. And you are mine, Natalie said, tears of happiness in her eyes. I was lost and you found me. I was broken and you helped me heal. I thought my life was over, but instead it was just beginning. Thank you for choosing me, Xavier. Every day, thank you for choosing me. Always, Xavier said. For all our days, I will always choose you. They kissed as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and gold. Their children and grandchildren were gathered around them, the sound of laughter and conversation filling the air. The ranch stretched out before them, beautiful and prosperous and alive. This was their legacy, Natalie thought. Not just the land or the cattle or the horses, but the love they had built together, the family they had created, the life they had chosen. In 1910, as they celebrated their 33rd wedding anniversary and Xavier's 59th birthday, Natalie commissioned a photographer to come to the ranch. She wanted to capture this moment, this beautiful life they had built together. The whole family gathered for a portrait. Natalie and Xavier in the center, their 3 children and their spouses arranged around them, and their 8 grandchildren filling in the spaces. "Everyone smile," the photographer said, ducking under the black cloth of his camera. But Natalie was already smiling. How could she not? She had everything she had ever wanted, everything she had never dared to dream possible on that terrible day in Genoa when her brother had sold her at auction. Xavier's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. She turned to look at him, and he met her gaze with those blue-gray eyes that still made her heart skip a beat after all these years. "I love you," she mouthed silently. "I love you more," he mouthed back, and she laughed because they had this argument all the time, each insisting they loved the other more. The photographer counted down, and the flash went off, capturing them all, frozen in that moment of perfect happiness. Years later, that photograph would hang in the main hall of the Silver Creek Ranch, a testament to what could be built from the ashes of betrayal. A reminder that sometimes the worst moments in life could lead to the best, that love could bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, that 2 people choosing each other freely was more powerful than any contract or obligation. As Natalie and Xavier grew older, they remained devoted to each other and to the life they had built. They spent their days working the ranch alongside their children and grandchildren, teaching the younger generation everything they had learned over the decades. They spent their evenings on that same porch where they had shared so many conversations, watching the sun set over the mountains, holding hands and remembering. "Do you have any regrets?" Natalie asked Xavier one evening when they were both in their 60s, their bodies slower but their hearts still young. "Only that I did not find you sooner," Xavier said, "that we did not have even more years together." "We have had a lifetime," Natalie said, "and what a beautiful lifetime it has been." "The most beautiful," Xavier agreed, "because I spent it with you." In the spring of 1920, when Natalie was 67 and Xavier was 69, they renewed their wedding vows in a ceremony attended by their entire family. It had been Xavier's idea, wanting to celebrate 43 years of marriage and reaffirm their commitment to each other. "I promise to love you until my last breath," Xavier said, his voice wavering with emotion as he held her hands. "And if there is anything beyond this life, I will love you there too. I promise to love you with all that I am," Natalie said, tears streaming down her face. "You saved me, Xavier. You gave me life and love, and everything good I have ever known. I will love you forever and beyond." Their family cheered as they kissed, and that night there was a celebration that brought together not just the Remingtons, but friends and neighbors from across the state. The Silver Creek Ranch was filled with music and dancing and joy, as Natalie danced with Xavier, moving slowly to accommodate their aging bodies, but still moving together in perfect harmony. She thought about the girl she had been at 22, that girl who had stood on an auction block terrified and betrayed with no idea what her future would hold. If she could go back and tell that girl what was waiting for her, what would she say? That the cowboy who bought her would become the love of her life? That they would build a ranch and a family and a legacy together? That she would spend 43 years as his wife and every single day would be a gift? That girl probably would not have believed it. The pain had been too fresh, the betrayal too deep, but it had all been true, every beautiful moment of it. "What are you thinking about?" Xavier asked, his breath warm against her ear. "About how grateful I am," Natalie said, "for you, for this life, for every choice that led us here." "Even the hard choices?" Xavier asked. "Especially the hard choices," Natalie said, "because those are the ones that made us who we are." They danced until late in the evening, surrounded by the love they had created, the family they had built, the life they had chosen. And when they finally retired to their room, exhausted but happy, they fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, just as they had every night for 43 years. Xavier Remington died peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1925, at the age of 74. Natalie woke that morning to find him still beside her, his face peaceful, his hand still clasped in hers. She did not cry immediately. Instead, she lay there with him for a long time, memorizing every line of his face, every beloved detail, thanking him for the life they had shared. "You kept every promise you ever made to me," she whispered. "You loved me well, Xavier Remington. I will carry that love with me until we meet again." The funeral brought people from across Nevada and beyond. Everyone who had ever known Xavier Remington came to pay their respects to a man who had lived with integrity and honor, who had built a legacy of love and fairness and respect. Natalie stood at his grave, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, and she told him goodbye. "I will love you forever," she said, as they lowered his casket into the ground. "Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for giving me life. Thank you for every moment we shared. I will see you again, my love, when my time comes." Natalie lived for 5 more years after Xavier's death, years filled with family and the continuation of the ranch work, though she let her children and grandchildren take on more of the burden. She spent her days telling stories to her great-grandchildren about their great-grandfather, making sure they knew what kind of man he had been. On a warm spring evening in 1930, at the age of 77, Natalie sat on the porch where she and Xavier had spent so many evenings together. She watched the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in those familiar shades of orange and pink and gold. She felt tired, the kind of bone-deep tiredness that spoke of a life fully lived. "I am ready," she said softly, to the wind, or to God, or to Xavier waiting for her on the other side. "I am ready to come home." She closed her eyes and did not open them again. They buried her beside Xavier, and the headstone read, "Natalie Remington, beloved wife, mother, grandmother. She was sold in chains but found in love. 1853-1930. The Silver Creek Ranch continued to thrive under the management of their children and grandchildren, a testament to everything Natalie and Xavier had built together. Their story became legend in Nevada, told and retold, a reminder that love could triumph over even the worst circumstances, that 2 people choosing each other freely was the most powerful force in the world. And on quiet spring evenings, when the sun set over the mountains and painted the sky in shades of gold, some of the ranch hands swore they could see 2 figures sitting on the porch of the old house, holding hands and watching the sunset together, loving each other still in whatever came after this life. Because love like that did not end with death. Love like that was eternal, lasting beyond breath and bone and time itself. Love like that was the kind that changed the world. One choice at a time, one promise kept, one day at a time, forever.